All right. We've got power in the audio system. Good morning. I was thinking about this class and next week's class, trying to guess which would be the short class. I think this one's a strong contender. We'll see if it gets worse next week. We'll maybe hold class in the library. The travel expectations, I guess, for the holiday with it being on Wednesday are splitting the difference. Maybe we'll double down. All right, well, you guys know, but just to kind of recap, we're going through the 10 Commandments, lest, of course, remember the Sabbath, and we're looking at the Old Testament commandment, trying to understand why it was given, right, and then moving over into the New Testament to find where either the specific commandment or the principle is restated, with a heavy emphasis on the application of what we learn. And that involves a lot of conversation. I want to commend you guys for the last 3 weeks, right? It's been really strong. You guys have had a lot to say. I know it's a small crowd and we're all spread all over the auditorium, but hopefully that doesn't dampen your spirits to communicate and share. I think today's topic, on the surface, everybody can relate to this because we're going to talk about honor your parents. We all have a parent. I realize that not everybody's familial situation is the same, and so your personal orientation towards the topic may differ from mine, and that's okay. We can talk about that if you'd like. So let's look into Exodus 20 and verse 12. And I should point out that this is the fourth week of the class, and we are now deviating from the scriptures and moving down past the fourth commandment into the fifth commandment. We're skipping, remember the Sabbath. We'll probably talk about that in later weeks of the class, right? But as you recall, we're talking about the 9 commandments that are repeated in the New Testament. Exodus 20 and verse 12 is, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land and that the Lord your God is giving you. So what is this? This is a commandment, right? It's not a suggestion to be respectful to your parents, to honor your parents, right? So this is about our relationship with our forefathers, right? I actually think we're going to look into it a little bit, not directly, but I think as you study this topic, you'll see that it's specific to your immediate previous generation, but it also applies to other people besides just your mom and your dad. So let's start out and get an understanding. What is honor? Now, I got to tell you, when I sat to think about this, there's certain things in my life, the more complicated it is, the easier it is for me to kind of grasp it and explain it. It's the very simple things that are hard for me to define. It just is this way, right? So what do you guys think of? How do you define the word honor? Respect. Okay, what does respect mean?
Esteem them better than you.
Esteem better than you? Okay. So I won't abuse you by asking what esteem means. But this is what I'm talking about. It's a very fundamental concept, and it's going to be hard to explain in words. But I think it's one of those situations where we all know it when we see it, right? You instantly know if someone is being disrespectful, and I think you probably instantly know if someone is being respectful to you or to others, right? Esteem was one of the words that I had written. Also, treat with admiration, right? So in terms of honor, I think it's something that's really, like a lot of other things, it's not so important about what you say that you do as it is the actions that you take, right? This is one of those live a sermon kind of situations, right? So we have to ask, why did God give us this commandment, right? Think that there's a number of reasons. Initial sort of high level is a type and anti-type argument, right? Whereby you have the relationship with your parents that is a type, or technically an anti-type, I think. I get a little confused about which is the actual and which is the shadow, but it's teaching us about God's relationship with us, right? So it's a sort of an incubator or a pilot plant, if you will, for your understanding of God. You begin to understand your parents and you act a certain way with your parents, and when it's correct, that's representative of how God is working with you in your life, right? On a more practical maybe, or more material way, I think this is a system by which it keeps good order in society, right? Because you learn to follow the rules, you learn that there are consequences for not following the rules, that there are benefits, that the rules are there for your well-being, right? And you learn that love returns love, right? And then your home is your first experience with leadership, right? And, we're all flawed, right? So I'm sure a lot of us here have kids and have regrets, right? And all of us were children, and I'm sure we have regrets about that as well. But in general, the godly home leads to the production of good citizens, right? All right, so what do you guys think? Are there any other reasons why God may have said that we need to honor our parents? Jack?
Teach us how to be safe, teach us how to get dressed, teach us how to eat properly and act properly for our own good. When we break those rules, we suffer.
So you were an educator, right? And so I mentioned earlier that maybe there are other respectful positions that we need to honor in addition. That this is just the beginning of a greater spectrum. In school, you needed to have that discipline and that relationship with the teachers and the administrators, right?
We had a young man that was bigger and taller than I am. And we would pray together and point out from the scriptures what was wrong with what they did. And then we would get down, and they would not have any prayer too. And this young man that was tall and bigger than me prayed, "Dear God, I'm so thankful I can go to a school where I can't get away with doing wrong." He's a policeman now.
Oh, right. Well, good. I maybe sometimes derisively think about the horse and tying the horse up when it's young, and then you don't have to tie it to the post. You can just loop the reins over the post, and the horse believes that it's stuck there, right? It's a little bit like that. What you're saying is this respect for you mitigated the physical differences between you and this other young man, right? So if it had been in his mind to be disrespectful, you could have had a real challenge, right? Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking it's first place a foundation of learning how to live on authority.
And so it's a foundation of learning authority, right? You certainly, as I said earlier, you certainly learn that there are benefits and consequences, right? So it's a model. Yep. Anybody else? Oh, Charles back there in the back.
God respect talked about the relationship between the people and him, but now on a parents and children, it's if you don't have that relationship between parents and children, it's gonna be much harder to have that relationship between you and God as far as the proper respect. We should be showing. And this is just, I think, circle along that
Right.
foundation.
So God created the home to help us move into a right relationship with him, right? Shirley?
I notice that God doesn't say anything about honor, respect being earned.
Okay, you're right.
It's just a command.
It's a commandment, right? So that we're going to talk. So let me back up and give a caveat here. This is a kind of a thorny topic. I know not necessarily the last time it was taught, but I know a previous time that it was taught, there were some hard feelings that ended up being a second lesson, and so I didn't really want to dig too deeply into failings of the human portion of this, but yeah, it is a command, and it doesn't depend on the quality of leadership you're getting, right? And I'm reminded of the Band of Brothers said it a lot. We salute the rank, not the man, right? So somebody else.
To be a little literal, in this passage it says, why? To honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord has given you. And if you fast forward to Ephesians, it says, children, obey your parents, that it may go well with you. So it
Okay,
gives
so
you a reason.
Rocky's not here today. You're teaching ahead in my notes. I'm seriously gonna have to check the security of my my home network, right? But yes, you are correct, Tracy. That is the first command with a promise, right? And so we're going to come to Ephesians in a little while. All right.
I just keep thinking.
Will not be denied.
I just keep thinking that this is the first time that we have to realize that everything is not about us.
Okay.
I mean, it teaches us to be selfless versus selfish.
Submissive.
Yes.
Right. And so when we start out, when we're born, we're completely innocent and totally submissive and not at all self-interested, correct?
Well, I mean.
Eric got the joke. So, no, obviously, little tiny human beings are extremely self-absorbed, right? And so it is the responsibility of your parents to move you out of that, and God is telling you to cooperate with that program, right? Dave.
So this is going to conflate and cause a second one, but for the Israelites, I think this might have had a little bit an additional meaning. You know, in these days, genealogy was very important, right? Mm-hmm. Promises were made by God to someone and their lineage, you know, all their descendants, and vice versa. And therefore, they probably were very proud of their lineage because that's where the promise was coming from, things like that. It doesn't really apply to the New Testament as much, but it's another take on it.
Well, except when you think about we wear his name,
Yeah.
right? So that's a good segue. Let's turn in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 9, verse 18. So we talk about kind of an example of good and bad, so disrespectful and respectful. It says, the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew that what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. He also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. So here you kind of see what David was talking about in terms of the family name, right? And how God uses that both for benefit and for discipline. Excuse me. I was struggling last week, so I staged a box of tissue this week. And we also see here, there's some controversy about what it means specifically that Ham did. I think for our purposes, we're going to assume that the text is direct and what it says, he saw his father naked, that's what happened, right? Because when you start to look at it, and the other arguments kind of take some stretches, right? You kind of have to make some logical leaps, and here we don't have to make any leaps, so we'll just take it at face value. But nevertheless, it was considered to be disrespectful what Ham did, and he was cursed, and it was respectful what his brothers did, and so they were blessed at his cost.
I think that ties into Romans chapter 5.
Okay.
Verse 13, where it says, "For sin was indeed in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law." And so if they never had a problem with respecting parents, so they would stay in the land. You can't have a Bible country if you don't have respect for your parents.
Right. It's like I said last week that all of our relationships run on trust, right? And it's very hard to trust someone who doesn't respect you, or to trust someone you don't respect yourself, right? So, as I say, the whole parental relationship is the foundational building block to so many other relationships, including societal, right? Other comments? Yes, sir.
Many times we presume that the parent-child relationship can be a good one, and so we see that, it's easy to translate that relationship to God and us. If that relationship is not good, parents were somehow not being the best parents they can be, that's why sometimes it's hard. It's hard for individuals, children, to understand the relationship with God because they didn't have that example at home. And so so there was a great relief to say, I know it wasn't a good home, but this is how it should be. And here's how God would have wanted.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Like I said, I don't want to dig too deep into the point where we're starting to, expose people's past or to cause hard feelings, but it is important to discuss at least a little bit, and maybe we can all go away and kind of think about how it was for us and be sensitive to others about these kinds of topics. So let me, a little bit more generically, if we look in Ezekiel, and we're going to skip around a little bit, 22:7, and then we're going to jump to 15 and 16. It says, "Father and mother are treated with contempt in you. The sojourner suffers extortion in your midst. The fatherless and the widow are wronged in you. I will scatter you among the nations and disperse you through the countries, and I will consume your uncleanness out of you, and you shall be profaned by your own doing in the sight of the nations, and you shall know that I am the Lord." So this kind of goes back to what you're saying, Keith, right? So what you're talking about here is an individual problem, right? Like a personal issue. Obviously, it's a broad topic in the culture that these people have this big issue, but it results in a corporate punishment, right? So God's saying, you guys don't treat your parents right, among a lot of other things, obviously. So your whole country's gone. I'm taking it away from you, right? And I think Keith, it's been said from our front a lot that our country's relationship with God is leading to problems, right? We don't have a right relationship as a people, but I think what we can take from that, and kind of what I wanted from this whole class, is that it's an individual problem, right? We can't fix a corporate problem, we can really only fix our own problem, or at least you have to start there first before you can fix the bigger thing. So there is a positive side. So we'll talk about a blessing. And it's a kind of a skipping around reading here. We're gonna look in the book of Ruth, chapter 2, and then we're gonna go to 3, and then we're gonna go to 4. But we're not gonna read all those verses, right? Don't worry. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it and went up into somewhere. I clipped the verse, sorry. Skip into 3, verse 1 through 5. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that you may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do. The city I will do." Her mother-in-law said what she had gleaned, and he also brought out to her and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. Guys, I apologize. I must have had a big editing error here. And then Ruth chapter 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So I think we all know the story of Ruth and Naomi. But Ruth, not Naomi's own child, right? She was married to Naomi's son. But out of respect, she refuses to leave Naomi to her own devices to return home, right? So knowing full well the culture, what that meant for her, she stayed with Naomi and goes back to a country that I don't believe she'd ever been to, knowing that she wasn't going to be super popular as a Moabite, right? That wasn't the Jews and the Moabites weren't really close. And then her mother-in-law says, "Hey, I want you to go and basically make yourself married to this guy. Put yourself in a position that's going to lead to a permanent, life-altering change." And she said, "Yes, ma'am." And she went and did what she was told to do, right? And she was blessed for that because we know ultimately she's a very distant relative of Christ, right? So she's the grandmother or great-grandmother of King David, right? So because of her obedience, because of her trust in what her mother-in-law was saying and being willing to do what she was told, she bears a very large part in the salvation of mankind, right? So, I guess anybody have comments about Ruth or any of that? It's pretty straight.
How we treat our elderly, as you mentioned earlier, you take care of your elderly, and America is getting to the point where really just where Canada's at right now, where they have euthanasia for the elderly. And so it's sort of a selfishness. I care about myself more than them. I'm not going to take care of them because they're in the way. So we'll do euthanasia for them, so it's just about us. And as God said, if you get to that stage in life, you can't have a country anymore because you have no respect for life in general. And that's the scary part when you look at the elderly like that.
Yeah. The small course deviation in a long flight, you end up far from the target, right? So doesn't necessarily being respectful to your elders doesn't seem like such a critical problem. Like, we got way bigger things to deal with, Keith. This if they weren't kind to somebody, what does that matter? Mean tweet, right? but it probably does have a more corrosive impact than we think, right? All right, so this particular commandment, the fifth, is the first one that's not about God, right? So the first four commandments, you see God demanding things based on who he is and to support our understanding of him, right? And then the commandments that come after this are all, this is a key or a linchpin kind of commandment that makes all of those other commandments easier. It makes them function, right? So you see, this is kind of a tipping point commandment. And I used the word that the commandments that come after this one derive out of respect and honor and an understanding of that system. Harry?
So if you look at that word honor, it's a word of divinity, right? It's to be, I don't know the Hebrew word or how to pronounce it, but it's to glorify or to be glorified, right? So it has two demands under one word, which is that divine ancient Judaism look at your parents, and that's why he was cursed when he looked at Noah, is that divine and then that interpersonal relationship. Because in ancient Judaism, the parent or the father and the mother are the ones that brought in the look of God, their faith in God, because they're following God. Now, we don't particularly have that going on now, but for ancient Judaism, when it says honor or glorify your mother and father, it goes back to Leviticus chapter 19 where he says, listen, you need to revere mother, father, and the Sabbath. He kept all that in a divine nature. And then this is the first command, like you said earlier, that has a reward. This is the first thing that he says, do this, do this, do this, and now glorify, here's the reward you will get from this, which is really interesting for the child and the parent. The parent must understand that, I looked at it in a divine nature, so I must make sure what I'm giving to my children, when it's God-based, must be true, and I must show faith in God, because they are going to see the relationship I have with God, so they can develop that same relationship, so they can develop that relationship for their children and keep that cycle going, as you said earlier.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the opposite side of this coin a little bit later, right? But technically, the Hebrew word that's used here for honor means to make weighty, right? And I didn't really want to dig too deep into that because I don't think that hits us the same way it probably hit them. And then later, when in like Proverbs, he's talking about dishonoring your parents. It actually is to make light or to make them less, right? I think we get that concept, but I'm not sure that the words specifically mean quite the way they would have heard it to us. Let's look in Ephesians 6, chapter 1, and we'll see now where this is coming in the New Testament. As children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. So some of you Bible scholars may be sitting there thinking, well, you've said in the past, or I may not have specifically said it out loud, but I generally tend, if there's something that Jesus said, to try to bring that forward first, right? So you say, well, why not look at Matthew 15 or Mark 7, right? And the reason I didn't in this case is because at that time when Jesus is talking, the old law is still in effect, and he's not giving a command to us as much as he was debating with the Pharisees. So that's not to lessen what he was doing there, not to make that smaller, but just to say that in context, he was using the Old Testament as the Old Testament in a conversation about the Old Testament law, right? So here we see very clear, after the resurrection, Paul is telling us, obey your parents, right? So that's a command. But we will come back to Matthew 15 at least in a little while. Comments, thoughts on that? Disagreements? No, non-controversial. I got away with it. Okay. All right, so why is it restated in the New Testament? Well, I think that's kind of obvious, right? That things haven't changed. You still need to have this societal preparedness, right? You need to have that pipeline to good quality citizens. You're still learning about your relationship with God. I think what did change, though, is, at least for me, in the Old Testament, there's less focus on the family, and it's less obvious in the Old Testament what the purpose of family was and how the church and the family are representative of heaven and the relationship we have with God, right? It's much more directly stated in the New Testament. All right, so the heading I put here is that honor of parents is one facet of the respectful individuals that Christians should be, right? So if we look into 1 Peter 2:17, it says, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor, servants be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. And I think that's here where we step off into what you were talking about. I'm sorry, what's your name? Richard. So, Richard, this is, I think, God telling us, hey, and it doesn't necessarily relate well to Americans in our circumstance because we're not really indentured servants, we're not slaves. But I think we can kind of read sideways with this edict that says it doesn't matter if your boss, your slave master, whatever, is nice to you or mean. You be respectful and you work hard because you don't work for them, right? So I think we can look at that and say, just because you had bad parents doesn't mean that you should be disrespectful back, right? I think we all know the old two wrongs don't make a right. But if you're sitting here and you have bad parents, I think what you have to do is you look past that and you be respectful to them because of your relationship with God. Richard?
Just to add to that, sometimes the challenge is because of God using the family as an example of how to be the church. If your relationship with the family is a challenge, when you go out and evangelize and you bring people to the church, when you don't have that same, I work with churches, so I know, I understand exactly.
Yeah.
But there's folks that may not have,
Right.
and they had challenges in the families as they're coming up. So when they come to the church, their relationship and how they respect and all of that, you may have to do some additional teaching, or maybe have to go back and, you can't presume that, oh yeah, they have a good family and so they know how to act in church. Sometimes you have to go an extra step and say, this is the relationship that you should have with God and to the elders and to seniors and to your brothers and sisters, as opposed to, yes, I understand your point, yes, we should respect our parents regardless, because that's what the Bible said. But when you have a strained relationship, it's just like in the church. That when you've been, when everybody in the church is not treating you right, you have to have that same spirit. You got to say, you know what, this person did me wrong, but in spite of that, God is God is who I'm doing it for, as opposed to just because of the relationship. So that was part of the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, so two things there. I think we often forget that the church is composed of fallible people, and we demand infallibility in the church, right? And that's a mistake on our part. And you're right. I think when we go out, like I have wonderful parents, right? And fortunately still with us. The relationship I have with my dad, when you say to me, God is your father, that causes me no problems, right? But if your relationship with your father was negative, right, non-existent, really bad, whatever that was, it is a challenge, right? And I think culturally, I don't know if it's global, but certainly in the U.S., we have this feeling that God would never challenge me outside of what I think is acceptable, right? So my personal sin, well, that's just my nature, and God made me this way. And God would never ask me to move beyond that because that's way too hard, right? And I think we see that a lot. I didn't really bring my toe stompers, but I'll put them on for a second here. Homosexuality, right? God made me this way, and He would never ask me to deny my own nature, right? Well, God gave me this terrible father, so He must be, if He says that the relationship is like the father, He must also be terrible, right? And I think that's flawed logic, and I think it's against the teaching of the Scriptures, right? Many people in the Scriptures are called to move past what would seemingly be insurmountable hurdles to achieve God's will, right? Comments?
In Mark 7, you can get the talks about in verse 9, and he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For God said, honor your father and your mother. Whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father and mother, whatever you have gained from me is Corban, that is given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his mother or father. Thus, you void the word of God by your tradition. So that as man goes on, their tradition that they set up, they no longer respect.
Yeah, we're gonna get there specifically, and I guess the.
I was just gonna say, in the world today, it does seem like there's a lot more broken families than when I was, for whatever reason. And a lot of it, there's like no respect, right? Children don't respect parents, parents don't respect kids, they might not even know their children very much because they're so busy doing with whatever. So to take it just one step broader in piggybacking on what Richard was saying, people are coming from a different place than what, for example, I am, because I had a stable, I had parents and grandparents in the same community, and I had a good foundation and learned to respect, even though sometimes I did not agree with my parents. But if, when we're talking to people and evangelizing, and if they have a bad family relationship, not just parents, but bad family, if we can help them hear and take our time and we're patient and we work with them and we show them the love that the church family has for one another, and that we're not perfect, but that we love one another, and that whole relationship also is part of what God has created for us, so that we have that relationship with Him. I think that's one way to overcome all this broken family and disrespect that people have for one another in the world when they see.
Yeah, the problem is just getting them here and then
But when they
committing to be the congregation that delivers on that. And certainly when we arrived here, Gold Hill became our family, right? We didn't have local family, and the members here were far and beyond what we would have expected in terms of help. So I guess we'll move on a little bit here. Does how we honor parents change as we age? Straightforward question, right? Let's look in Proverbs 1, 8, and 9. It says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." And then in Colossians 3:20, it says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." So as we're young, as we're small, right, the level of the command is just accept what your parents tell you, do what you're told. But as we get a little bit older, it gets more complex, right? In Exodus 21 and 17, and this is going to come from the New English Translation because I felt like it fit our language pattern a little bit better. It says, "Whoever treats his father or his mother disgracefully must surely be put to death." So don't despise your parents when they tell you something that you maybe disagree with. You can disagree, but you don't have to be disrespectful, right? It says, and it gets kind of crazy. It says, not to threaten your parents physically. In Proverbs 19:26, "He who does violence to his father and chases away his mother is a son who brings shame and reproach." And then what Keith was tapping into is not steal from your parents or defraud them of financial support. Proverbs 28 and 24, "Anyone who steals from his father and mother and says, 'What's wrong with that?' is no better than a murderer." Matthew 15, 5 through 9, "But you say, if anyone tells his father or his mother, 'What you would have gained from me is given to God,' he need not honor his father. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God." So what was happening here is the Pharisees were allowing people to avoid caring for their elderly parents, right? So the tradition would have been that the eldest son provides financially for his parents. And then in this case, what they're doing is very deceptive. They're coming and saying, "Yeah, I had set aside $10,000 to take care of Dad when he was old, but that $10,000 I actually devoted to God. So sorry, Dad, you can't have that." And the Pharisees were saying, "That's fine. Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's devoted to God." And I think that's probably because they were benefiting from any of the contributions that would come out of that.
You know what's interesting? Verse 17 says, "Whoever curses his mother, father shall be put to death." It's interesting. We have an example where when they catch a woman and a man in adultery, they want to put the woman to death. You don't have an example where someone curses his mother, father, they would put the parent to death. So people pick and choose what they want to honor.
Yeah, and that picking and choosing is usually what's furthest from my own personal foibles, right? Where my weakness is over there, so we're going to talk about that, right?
Because we tend to forget everybody is somebody's mother or father.
Everybody is somebody's daughter or son.
Everybody that's born has a mother or father.
Yes.
So you have to show respect to really everyone you think about.
Yeah. So we're over time, but just to say that there is a responsibility on the other side that parents have. It says in Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." And in Proverbs 22:6, it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." So that implies that you as a parent are training your children and that you're doing that in a way that is engendering respect, right? All right, well, thank you guys for your participation. Another good week, and we look forward to seeing you next week.